Welcome to the Cycle Starters podcast, where we explore the transformative journeys of those breaking generational patterns and starting new cycles. I'm your host, Heather Rebecca Wilson, and today I am so thrilled to welcome Malia Wright-Merer, a DEIA integration and embodiment specialist who's dedicated to healing racialized and structural trauma. Malia brings a unique perspective to our conversation today, working at the intersection of accessibility, belonging, and collective healing. As someone who navigates life in a multiracial body, she challenges binary thinking and explores how our bodies remember, process, and heal from generational experiences. In today's episode, we'll dive deep into Malia's ancestral healing journey, discuss the cycles she's breaking in her own lineage, and explore how her work is creating ripples of change in collective healing and cultural transformation. So grab your favorite drink, find a comfortable spot, and join us for what promises to be an enlightening conversation about ancestry, healing, and the power of starting new cycles. Please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the growth of our channel. And thank you so much for your support. And now let's get into it with Malia Wright-Merer. Hi, Malia.
Hello. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy that you are here. Thank you for saying yes to joining me today. And I'm really just thrilled, excited, and grateful to be in dialogue with you, across all these different topics. So, how are you doing today?
Good. It's always so fun to hear your own bio
Yeah.
interwoven because when I hear it, I'm like, yeah, I want to do that. Yeah, that sounds fun. That sounds like a good time. I want to dive into that work. And that's why I do it. So I'm just excited to be here and being in these conversations. These conversations give me life. So I'm just so honored to be here and I'm doing really well. I'm feeling grounded in this particular moment, finding oscillation between actually one of my teachers, Reza Menakem, who wrote My Grandmother's Hands, always
Yeah.
says, nibble, don't gorge.
Mm,
And recently I've been gorging in the political climate of the world.
yeah.
And I was like having this reminder this week to nibble, to be in titration, to be in balance. So today I feel good.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
What great advice that is to be nibbling and titrating things, right? You're
Mhm.
microdosing these things.
Microdosing, exactly. And the intensity of everything, we're just microdosing.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, okay. So we have so many things to talk about, but I think the place that makes the most sense to start is, having you share what you know about your ancestry. And I know that really just opens the portal into the whole story that you're going to share. But what can you share with us just about your ancestral background, first of all?
So, as you mentioned in what you know about me, but I do live in a multiracial mixed body. I love to say mixed because I think there's a little bit of trickster energy in it. I think there's kind of the questioning, the confusion, the living in a body that doesn't make sense to the binary world. And so my mother, from what I grew up as, my mother is Chinese American. My grandfather grew up in Hawaii and he is full Chinese. And my grandmother grew up in Brooklyn, New York. And from when I was growing up, knew that she was half Chinese and a quarter Spanish, Irish, Portuguese, and maybe French. And this is the knowledge I had growing up as a child. My dad's side of the family, my grandmother, her parents immigrated from Sweden. So she's full Swedish. And my grandfather has been lineages in the now known as United States since the Mayflower. So we had ancestors on the Mayflower travel over from England. So his lineage background is British and also Swedish, and I believe some French too. So growing up, I had this Scandinavian and European. My paternal grandfather always said, like, he's Heinz 57, which the Heinz 57 was in Europe. European Heinz 57, like a little mix of everything in that regards. So, and then my parents met in Los Angeles, both born and raised Los Angeles, where I now live on Tongva land. And they met, and against all odds from family members not wanting them to be together, here I am. And they have been actually married. They're celebrating their 40th anniversary this year.
Oh my goodness. Happy anniversary to your parents.
I
That's
will let them
fantastic.
know.
Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so you're here. You made it
I
against
made
all
it.
odds. You
Hmm.
made it into this human body, into this mixed body. And my goodness, I can relate to so much of what you're sharing because I too am multiracial. And yeah, mixed identity development is a real thing. And we can certainly have trauma around this, right? We can have identity development trauma, especially when we don't have somebody in our lives who can show us and model for
Mm,
us what it means to have a positive self identity, especially when it
yeah.
comes to, being mixed, right? Having a mixed background. So I want to dive deeper into this
Yes. This
ancestry
this was the
because,
surface.
yeah, that was the surface. Tell us more about what you've discovered more recently about your ancestors.
So I first want to share what we've discovered and then explore what we knew before the discovery, because I always find that so fascinating. A couple years ago, my brother ended up doing the 23andMe, and he got his results back and found out it said 10% West African, Sub-Saharan African, and Nigerian. And we looked at these records, and both of us were like, wait, what?
Mm-hmm.
This is not part of our story that we've learned. I knew my grandfather was full Chinese. Like, I knew that. It was very clear. Like, there are records. My great grandfather is from China. My great grandmother had come from a lineage of Chinese immigrants in Hawaii, and who had lived generations in Hawaii. My grandmother, though, there was this big question mark, which is also the lineage. This is my maternal grandmother, so my mother's line. It's always had wounding. It's also been the lineage that has felt most, I want to say, tender to explore. I've been on an ancestral healing journey for, I want to say, about the last 8 years or so, intentional healing journey. And this is always the bloodline that has had the most tenderness and tension. So when my brother found this out, we both started going into deep study. We started going into the census records. We found out that my great grandmother, so this is my maternal grandmother, her name is Meilon. So her mother, Eloise, was mixed. And we were always told that this part of the lineage was Spanish, Irish, Portuguese. That's always what we were told. But then when we started going through the census records, my grandmother, when she was really young, she was listed as Indian.
Mm-hmm.
And then she was also listed as Mongoloid, right? And then when you go back, her parents and grandparents were listed as Black, mixed, mulatto, Black, mulatto, Black, mulatto. So my brother and I were just exploring this lineage. And one of the things that I felt immediately was grief. Grief for not knowing this part of my lineage, not being able to honor this part of my lineage before, and that this part of my lineage was hidden and masked. And that was a big part of discovery. So when my brother and I were exploring this, I started noticing a couple things that I had picked up over the years since I was really young. Like, I remember
Mm-hmm.
seeing a photo of my great grandmother, and I was like, Spanish, Irish, Portuguese? I don't know. This woman ain't white.
Mm-hmm.
Which I know
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of nuance in color and
Right.
features. But I was like, she actually looked like me. And my grandmother's always said, "You look like my mother. You look like Eloise." And I also always knew when I was a kid that when I would look at other mixed Chinese and European kids, I was like, I don't feel like I look like them, even though we
Right.
all have different features. We all look different. But there was something that was there. I actually thought I had Native Hawaiian blood. I was like,
Mm,
maybe that is it or something, because I always felt like even with if I'm looking at the container around mixedness, which it doesn't have a concrete look, I still felt like I didn't look like others who had similar mixed identity to me. But I remember that as a child. I remember looking at photos and thinking, my great grandmother looks like me. And then I also remember when I was just out of college, one of my good friends, she's Nigerian, she saw a photo of my grandmother and she said, "My grandmother's black." I was like, wait, what?
mhm,
And so I asked my mom, I was like, is there black lineage in our family? And she said, no, not that I know of. And she actually asked my grandmother, so her mother, my grandmother Milan, she asked her, and my grandmother got upset.
mhm,
How dare you ask? My grandmother grew up in Brooklyn. She's half Chinese. She's a quarter black and a quarter white. If I think that might be maybe like 33% black. She didn't look like anyone else when she was growing up. And she had uh, a lot of discrimination because not only was she not white, but she didn't look Chinese. And she didn't feel like she belonged in any area or any group of people. And with that became this feeling of, I need to create a shield. I need to be American. To this point today, there is internalized racism and this internalized harm. Like, no, I'm just American. My brother and I, both when we were young, we stood out as, you're Asian, you're the Asian one. Both my brother and I are mixed. I'm definitely more white adjacent than he is. He has darker features than I do. And still, we were like, you're Asian, you're Oriental. You're the Oriental one, you're the Asian one. And we had that when we were younger. And we asked my mom, like, did you have that experience growing up? Like, did people just point out and say that you were Asian or Oriental? Or what did people say to you? And she said, nope, we were American.
mm,
That's what we were told. If anyone asked us, we were American. So immediately, like, there's this growing up erasure of culture. And then for my brother and I to grow up with not knowing where to belong or where to go, there was just a lot of confusion, which is a huge reason why I've been on this journey. But one of the parts of this lineage, especially in my grandmother's line, Maylon's, my mother's line, which I'm always so fascinated with, is the mother's line. Being a woman, I'm born with the eggs, right, that are in my body, in my ovaries. I'm born with the eggs that were in my body when I was in my mother's womb, in my mother's womb, in my mother's womb, in my mother's womb. And so there is this remembered story of being in the womb that I find so interesting. So, this lineage, this part of my story is something that's been really interesting to me. I also want to share this other thing that happened
mhm,
before we found out any of this information. So my mom and I were reading my grandmother's hands, Resma Menachem, I mentioned again. We were reading my grandmother's hands, exploring embodiment and healing around racialized trauma. And one of the exercises in the book asks you to call on one of your ancestors and to witness them in relationship to your body. So notice their stance, notice if they're standoffish, notice if they're welcoming and embracing, notice if there's kindness, if it feels cold, warm, hot, just exploring all of the senses of being in this imagined room with this ancestor. So I did this exercise. I imagined my great grandfather, so my mom's father, so the Chinese great grandfather, my mom's father's father, Chinese, immigrated from China. There was also some immigration before, but finding opportunity when there was war in the AIDS and when there was no place to go in China from Canton, moved to Hawaii. And I felt him distant. His arms were folded and he was kind of closed off, but not wanting to get rid of me. Just kind of there, kind of just like, okay, we're here. just noticing and observing. So my mom's doing this exercise at the same time as me. So I share my experience just witnessing my great grandfather. And I asked my mom how her experience was. And she said, I didn't imagine a person. I didn't see a person, but I felt like I was the person. And I was on a plantation and I was some sort of servant and the plantation was large and I was serving people and it wasn't mine. Like I didn't have a lot of rights. I remember her saying that. I didn't have a lot of rights, but I felt it. I could feel it. Like it was part of me. And I talked to her about this and I was like, who was this? What ancestor was this? And remember, this is before my brother did 23andMe,
Right.
before this is the whole like Portuguese, Spanish, Irish part of our lineage. Like
Mm-hmm.
we didn't know. So I'm thinking, okay, was it like a plantation in Hawaii? Like, was it
Right.
something, that they were workers on? And she was like, no, it was in the South. Like she knew she was like somewhere in the South. So this is all happening, but she knew she was a servant or some sort living on a plantation in the house. And when we discovered this part of our lineage, I talked to my mom about this and I was like, Mom, you were calling on one of our ancestors. We found out that our family came as slaves into South Carolina was where they ended up. And we found records of our ancestors from all the way to 1865. One of the most beautiful parts of that was just feeling my mother know before we knew. So this discovery was, I want to say maybe 3 years ago. So this is very recent. And part of this discovery is just really honoring erasure. I think that's something that really become clear was honoring survival, honoring erasure. And then last fall, I came across this article that was talking about this group of people called the Melungians. And this was a mixed group, a multiracial group that was kind of moved to the South Carolina, Tennessee area. So these communities of people were coming together because in a binary world, people didn't know what to do with multiracial bodies. So they kept on marrying each other. I mean, I'm not saying in like a incestuous way, but they kept in the community of staying multiracial. And also there was a part of it that was lightening the skin
Mm-hmm.
to come off. So then this is like really the big part of this article that felt like it hit my heart was then it said, because these people were multiracial, you might hear ethnically ambiguous, then they started saying that they were from Portugal, from Spain, and a mix of Portuguese, Spanish, and Irish. And when I read that, I don't know for sure, but I was like, oh my gosh, this was my family. This was that part of my lineage. Because I know that there were multiple generations of mixed lineage. And at the time, there was sterilization of bodies. And so they were trying to pass as something else to survive, to continue generations. When I think of that, I think about how I'm here today.
This is so powerful, sis. Thank you for sharing this story. And also, thank you for mentioning My Grandmother's Hands. That was such an important book for me along my ancestral healing journey. I think it really opened the door to, how we can internalize oppression, right? And I inherited that from both sides of my multiracial family, from the Filipino side and also from the Black side of my family. Yeah, it affects different bodies in different ways. I love that book so much. And I love that
Mhm.
you got a chance to study with Resma. That's so freaking amazing. Did you ever get a chance to tell was it your maternal grandmother? Was she the one who was
Mhm.
like, I'm American? Were you ever
Yeah.
able to share with her the results of that 23andMe test?
So my grandmother, she's got some stuff. She has some stuff. There's a lot of wound here. My mother, so she's one of 4 kids, and she has the best relationship with my grandmother. My mom's the youngest, but I don't
Mhm.
know what happened, but she is the most kind, supportive, nuanced, diplomatic,
Hmm.
person. And she can be in a space where there is just so much trauma that my grandmother's experienced, and she loves to blow her trauma. I don't think she loves to do it, but she does it very frequently. Blow her trauma, as like this is also a terminology in my grandmother's hands, blow her trauma onto other people. So she was the one who communicated with her about this. And my grandmother actually ended up doing her 23andMe too.
Okay, cool.
So I think my grandmother's response was, huh.
Mm,
I think that was probably the extent of that.
yeah,
She didn't ask questions. She didn't dive into it. She didn't explore more or want to know more. I don't think she wanted to know more. She just kind of was like, huh. So my grandmother did her 23andMe, which was fascinating because you see the map of all of the lineages light up. And specifically hers had, I think, every single part of the globe lit
wow,
up
wow.
in small, varying,
Hmm.
parts of herself. But I just was thinking about my grandmother so much because, especially growing up as somebody who's mixed in the 30s, that's when she was a kid, was in the 1930s. And how grateful I am to be growing up as, as a mixed kid, not in the 30s, but in
Right.
the last 35 years.
Yeah.
And how grateful I am to live in the time now than my grandmother who had no place to go. I mean, the fact that we're having this conversation here in this time is huge because this couldn't have happened.
Yeah. You're so right about that. My goodness, this is so powerful. Malia, this is incredible. Well, okay, I have a question for you. So you said that you've been on this ancestral healing journey for like almost a decade now, and the revelations about, where your ancestors were really from on your maternal side came through about 3 years ago. So when did the concept of ancestral healing enter your consciousness? When did you realize that patterns can be passed down? And I also have the power to start new cycles. I have the power to change and shift the pattern. When did that dawn on you?
Yeah. So I always say there's three different chapters so far of my life. Well, of I would say my career life. The first chapter, I was an actor. I moved to New York to pursue acting, and then very quickly I was like, I don't think this is for me. The second part of the chapter was my own healing journey. And that was when I studied Vedic sciences. I studied yoga, I studied Tantra, and I studied Ayurveda. And that was a lot of the line of work that I was in at the time. And when I was also studying Ayurveda, I started dabbling in trauma healing. That's when I learned about epigenetics, and I learned how we can carry emotional patterns in the womb from our mothers and also our lineages, and also from when we are in the womb too.
Yes.
So the emotional state of our mothers while we're in the womb, we can experience in our nervous systems. So it was around then where I was studying Ayurveda, I was studying more of the spirituality and Tantra,
Hmm.
but it kind of stemmed into more of that DNA imprint. And I was really fascinated at the time. And there's this Vedic practice called Tarpana. Have you
Hmm.
heard of that
I
before?
don't think I've heard of that. What? Tell us about it.
Well, Tarpana, from what I understand, is an ancestral honoring.
How cool.
And I remember this was maybe one of the first kind of rituals that I did, ancestral rituals, where we gathered foods of our ancestors and photos, and we had them in front of us, and we called on one of our ancestors. And the whole process was to see them, to witness their joy, to witness their pain, to witness their survival, to witness their confusion, and to just say, see you. That was it.
Beautiful.
And it was so simple. And I remember actually it was my father that I did. It wasn't like a very far distant lineage. It was my
Hmm.
dad. And I also noticed different people from my father's lineage coming up too in that. And maybe that was the lineage that felt most present.
Hmm.
and ready and available. So that was kind of the first exploration and integration. And I really love to explore it. And then I was studying more into trauma healing and intergenerational trauma and patterns that we experience and that we repeat. And when we start to have the power of witnessing and just witnessing, what does that start to shift in our lineage patterns? Sometimes I think about the process of healing. And especially on these energetic or more spiritual patterns, it can be so simple.
Yeah. Yeah.
It can be so simple. I mean, one of my teachers, this was when I was studying Ayurveda, one of my teachers said, the greatest gift that we can offer to spirit, to God, to ancestors, to whatever universe, land, is the power of awareness and attention. It's very easy to forget how simple these things are.
Yeah, for sure.
So that kind of stemmed. And then I also was able to study with Daniel Four.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with
Yeah.
ancestral medicine.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I love his work. And something I also love about his work is how much he's honored to lineage.
Mm-hmm.
He is a white man, and he's like, I'm a white man. And we're here honoring lineage, honoring the Yoruba lineage and also the stories that are told. He's really honoring. And actually, a lot of the work that I've done in ancestral healing with other people have been through him sharing teachings with other people who are not white. So there's something cyclical there that sometimes I'm like, I'm just here for the ride. Here we go.
So Gemini, right? Are
Yes,
you Gemini
Gemini.
sun? I love
Yeah.
that. This is where you shine. You're very curious. But okay, I'm going to put a pin in the astrology because we're going to talk astrology in a bit.
Okay.
I love that. We have that in common. So, what would you say are the generational patterns that you feel like you are dissolving in this incarnation? If you had to put a fine point on it, what would you say?
Well, I know I'm not alone in this. Scarcity,
Yeah.
not being enough, not having enough, not being able to be our true selves. That's something I felt from a very young age. And I think a lot of that is, we're born into this planet for a reason. I'm really into astrology and human design. And when I look at my charts, I'm like, everything's saying be authentic. So I do think there's a part of me being here that is to help illuminate the stories and truth of my ancestors and myself and others, of course. But I think there's a big pattern of scarcity. When I think of my maternal line, so this is like that new lineage, and there's so much survival in it. Speaking of, also, I didn't share this, but Melan, her father passed away. So Chinese father passed away when she was 6 or 7 years old, and she was living in Brooklyn. He was pretty well off from a shipping business. My mom always does that with quotation marks because she's like, there may have been some illegal activity. We won't know.
Yeah.
But shipping business. And then when he died, because my great grandmother wasn't Chinese, the Chinese family took all of the money. So my great grandmother was left as a single mom. And at the time, she was a stay at home mom, or, just taking care of the kids. And my grandmother had 2 siblings, and she had no money and no home. So she had to get a job, and she had to survive, and she had to figure things out. And I think also that puts a lot of mistrust for my grandmother in people and cultures, having something taken away from you. My grandmother always says, when I was little, we had fur coats, and then I had nothing, and I had to stuff my coat with newspaper for insulation to stay warm in New York.
Oh my goodness.
And I had to wrap newspaper around my shoes when it would snow. And so, I mean, it's classic, like, I had to boil cabbage and that's all I had.
Right.
But I think there's this survival, and I know I'm not alone. This is not an uncommon story of survival, of scarcity, of not having enough, of being stripped from something, of having rights or something that's yours taken away. So there's definitely this healing of scarcity. And I think this is also a pattern in my family of giving so much and not asking for help.
goodness. I can relate to these generational patterns, the not enoughness, the scarcity, the survival, not feeling safe to be your authentic self. Yeah, I totally relate to all of these. Thank you for sharing that. Okay,
Mhm.
so for some listeners or some viewers, they may not know that I'm an Ancestral healing guide, and I have a membership, a monthly membership called the Ancestral Healing Collective. That is a sacred space for female bodied cycle breakers to alchemize ancestral wounds into spiritual gifts, shifts to higher consciousness, embodied joy, and creative potential with pleasure and astrology as transformative medicine. And I say all of that because I want to switch this conversation into some astrology talk because you love it, I love it, and you shared already that you're a Gemini sun. Would you mind sharing your moon and rising signs as well?
Yes. I am an Aquarius rising
Mhm.
and a Sagittarius moon.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So Gemini is mutable air and then your Aquarius rising, so that's fixed air. So you got double air in your big 3 and then you've got this fiery moon. Okay. All right. Well, so I have to just state the obvious. You for sure shine as a Gemini in the world of communication and expression. Like, I love hearing you speak. I love listening to you tell stories. And one of the cool things, because I'm a Gemini rising, so I can relate to this, I feel like that Gemini energy allows us to see the patterns. We can see the things that on the surface wouldn't be connected, but we see, like, oh my God, this is connected to this and this is connected to this. So you are definitely embodying your Gemini sun. Your natal sun is where you shine. It's the special sauce that you mix into everything that you do that makes you stand out from the 11 other astrological signs. So, okay, Aquarius rising. Your rising sign is your perception of reality. It is the energy that people pick up on when they first meet you, and it's the vehicle for your divine mission, your purpose. And because the rising sign shifts like every 1.5 to 2 hours, this is why we ask for your time of birth, like your exact time, because you chose to come in as an Aquarius. And Aquarius being fixed air, air is our thoughts, our communications, our beliefs, our consciousness. Aquarius is deep space. Aquarius is out there. And your perception of reality is like, I'm here to like shake shit up. I'm here to do things differently. Informing is the last thing you want to do. And I feel like, the ancestral healing work is Aquarian for sure,
Mhm.
because we're honoring, we are building relationships with ancestors that are in another dimension, right? Loved ones who are no longer in the physical, which is like a stretch for a lot of people right now, right? Like, what do you mean I can have a relationship with people who are in the unseen realms? And also, you're future oriented because you are dissolving these patterns and starting new cycles that will impact our descendants, whether they come directly from you or not, right? Nieces, nephews, grandnieces, whatever, So it's like looking back, looking forward. I don't know. It's very multidimensional. It's very cool. Aquarius is the rebel. I mean, do you identify with that? Tell me, does any of this resonate? What's it been like to be an Aquarius rising in this beginning of the age of Aquarius, actually?
Oh, absolutely. I think I've always been a person to, first of all, see a person, like see through things.
Hmm.
And I've always, like had that moment like, oh, this is weird. Why did why does society do this?
Yeah.
This is weird, right? Does anyone else does anyone else think this is weird? And I've always been questioning that. So I also grew up, I think this is a great example. I grew up, my family was kind of religious, I'd say. I wouldn't say they're very, very religious. My father's side of the family was definitely very religious, Christian.
Mhm.
My mom's side of the family grew up Catholic, but it was more of like a just, kind of show up to the thing because you do the thing. But when I was growing up, we would go to church, and my dad, he was like, we're going to a Unitarian church because all belong. So, like,
Mhm.
this was the vibe. I also went to a Christian high school because it was a private school that was really good. And my
Mhm.
parents, I don't think they necessarily needed me to go to a Christian high school or my brother to go to a Christian high school, but it was a good school. And so we went. So I was very much immersed in Christian culture when I was growing up. My parents were very open to whatever my brother and I wanted to do, if we wanted to go to church or if we didn't. So they were very open. But I remember being really young. My best friend was Jewish, and I was maybe 8 years old. And I was so confused how Christianity could be a thing, according to this, what I had learned, which was if you believe in Christ, if you believe in Jesus, then you will go to heaven. And my best friend at the time was Jewish. And that wasn't part of her belief or her culture or her family lineage or her story or anything. And I remember being 8 years old and just sitting there deep in thought, like, how could this be possible? If heaven exists, then shouldn't it just be available and accessible to all bodies, regardless of what your belief pattern is? This is my Aquarian thought as an 8-year-old.
Yeah. You were a visionary, like,
Yeah.
out of the womb. I love it.
Yeah. And I remember I was like, yeah, but my friend is great. She's amazing. In what world is it where I have access to something else because of my belief system and you don't have access to something because of your belief system and your family? It just made no sense, which is why over the years, like even when I was in my Christian high school, I was like always questioning.
Yeah.
Even in my years when I would say I was more Christian, I remember loving the spiritual connection. I loved the community. I loved singing,
Mhm.
actually. I loved
Mhm.
the music, but I actually just loved being in relationship to spirit. And I kept having a hard time with a lot of the principles that were being shared in this organized religion. Now, I don't have any problem with people experiencing that and loving that for themselves in their own way. But I think that's a perfect example of Aquarian from the womb. I don't know about this. This is not inclusive. Excuse me.
Right.
Shouldn't we be inviting all people? Like, I didn't know the concept of heaven. I was like, shouldn't we be inviting everyone to heaven? Why does hell exist? These were all these thoughts that I was having as a little Aquarian child.
Yes, a very smart child, very curious and a deep thinker for sure, it seems like. And the other thing I forgot to mention is that Aquarius it's the humanitarian. Aquarius is very much concerned with balancing the well-being of the collective with individual authentic expression. And the reason why the collective is so beautiful, if we think of it as a tapestry, it's because it's woven of all of these unique threads that each of us is, right, as an individual. So I love that. I love that about Aquarian energy. So thank you for sharing all of that. So let's talk about this moon. The moon is your emotions, it's your emotional core, your emotional inheritance. And so in our natal chart, it can show us our ancestral wounds, but also the gifts that our ancestors gave us. And so you've got this fiery Sagittarius moon. And so I've had to do this in my own life, and I do this with my clients. I always remind people to do your moon because it also shows us what we are responsible for giving ourselves in order to feel safe and at home in our own energy. And my moon is in Virgo, so I'm like hard on myself, sometimes maybe a little bit too hard, but I'm pretty even. A fiery moon isn't necessarily even. So I like to describe fire. Well, first of all, it's our passion, it's our creative spark, it's intuition, it's inspiration, and it's very useful for cooking, having a fire, right? Or for camping, and we're going to keep our hands warm and we're going to roast some marshmallows. Fire is great, but fire can also burn a house down. Fire can also burn an entire forest down. How do you take care of your emotional life with this fiery moon? I'm so curious.
Well, actually, I had a friend ask me about my Sagittarius moon this morning, and she was like,
Okay.
how does this apply to your life? And I will say the Sagittarius moon is one that I think I'm a little less well versed
Mm-hmm.
in. I think it's a little more confusing to me
Mm-hmm.
because, and maybe actually you're the perfect person to ask because this is your work. Is from my understanding, Sagittarius has like the fire, but it's also the kind of the free spirit and the spontaneity. Is that
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes.
and your moon is like you mentioned, it's more of the emotional, it's the care, it's how this shows up. And now I'm thinking about my emotions with spontaneity. And I'm like, I feel, I
Yeah.
feel strongly. And I don't think I made this connection before, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. But
Mm-hmm.
I think right now I feel so much of the world. This is the first time I'm really connecting these dots, but I feel so much of the world. It almost feels like just, you say like the empath, right? Just being such an empath, I will just go through waves of emotions and feeling because of something I witness. I cry so easily.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I cry at the happy things. I cry at sad things. I just move through such waves. And I feel like that's spontaneous.
Yes.
I can't help it. And then also moving through those tears, allowing them to wave. Yesterday, I was having a very deep grief moment for what's going on in this country, in the US, and also the world. I had a deep grieving tears. And I knew that what I didn't want to do was get stuck there. But I also knew I had to feel it because that's like what we should be feeling, right?
Yeah.
Or should. Everyone's going to experience it differently. But my husband, he gets confused sometimes with emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And he married someone who's very emotional. But he was saying, oh, I feel like when you cry, I don't know what to do. And it feels so intense. I feel like something really intense happened. And I said, something intense did happen. It's intense.
Yeah.
Like, we should, like, in one part, we're all crying. We're grieving a death. And I remember just saying, like, I feel like my response is a completely human response. I think about these moments of different cultures of grief and how in more Western contexts, there can be this suppression of feeling, a suppression of movement. And speaking of fire, a suppression of fire, a suppression of anger, a suppression of sadness, a suppression of uncomfortable feelings. And I have that suppression too sometimes. Like, I don't like my anger. My anger part, I'm like,
Yeah.
look at the bright side. This is what I learned from my parents. Look at positivity. But I do think about that. Like, what is the fire releasing?
Yes.
And when I'm feeling so strongly, and allowing myself to let this fire come up and soften. I think there's this fear in maybe this Western context. There's a fear that if I catch fire, I'm going to burn everything down.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, it's like all I want to do is just be burning for, 20 minutes and then I'll soften and go away.
Yeah.
That's it. I'm not going to burn the house down. I'm good.
No. You are good. I mean, it sounds like you have a handle on this Sagittarius moon because it's mutable fire. So it means that you're changeable, you're flexible, you're adaptable. So it sounds like you allow yourself to feel your emotions when they come up, and they can be intense depending on what's going on, right? But you let them move. Like
Mm,
emotions are energy in motion. So it seems to me, based on what you're sharing, that you have a pretty good handle on this. I mean, the other
yeah.
thing that I would associate with Sagittarius moons is maybe a restlessness or some impatience, or you can get like bored of things easily, right? Like, and
Yeah.
also that's Gemini too. Like, Gemini gets
So
bored,
this is the
right?
other part. I was talking about this morning. I love the new. I love what's new. And I also love what's not new. I'm also Taurus Venus, and I
Okay.
love
Yeah.
cozy vibes, connection,
Mm,
cuddle,
yes.
good energy, mood
Yes.
lighting.
Yes, all
you
the
know,
creature comforts.
sustainability in a
Yes.
relationship. But I also love what's new. And I remember when I was younger, so I think this is shifting for me. When I was younger, I remember in college, I was having a hard time emotionally. I was feeling a lot of depression and confusion of
Mhm.
why I wasn't feeling good. I don't even think I named it depression at the time. And I started working at this bar and I was like, I just want to hang out with my new bar friends because I'm newly 21. And I was like, I don't want to hang out with any of my theater friends. I want new bar people that are older and fancy and new experiences. And, I just wanted new. And over the years, I felt like it was very volatile.
Mhm.
I just didn't want to be around anyone I knew. Like it was too comfortable. I wanted something unknown. And now I don't have the same
Right.
fire.
You're not as flammable.
I'm not as flammable, but I do notice there's a part of me that's always like, a spontaneous art date? Yes. Or, ooh, a spontaneous connection with someone. Like, ooh, I just met you and I want to stay up all night with you and just talk about life. And my husband's like, but why can't we just go home?
Because I'm a Sagittarius moon. That's why. I mean, it's like emotionally, the newness is good for you. It speaks to your heart, right? It's good for you to feel balanced and centered and safe in your emotions and your own energy to have new experiences. That fills you up, right?
Mhm.
Exploring, having adventures. I mean, that's Sagittarius. And also, the high expression of Sagittarius for me is the spiritual teacher, and also I find that people with a strong Sagittarius or Sagittarian presence in their charts, they're curious about people who are different from them, and surprise, surprise, you are a diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility teacher, trainer, consultant, right? I
Yeah.
really feel like I don't know your whole chart. Thank you for sharing your Venus and Taurus, and Venus rules Taurus, so your Venus is very strong.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I hear you on that. But based on, what you're sharing with me, it sounds like you're really embodying your chart and working with your natural gifts, and you have a lot of self-awareness.
Mhm.
And you've also evolved and grown over the course of your life. But I think it's because you are willing, at least from what I can tell, you're willing to question things and do the
Yeah.
deep reflective work, right? And look at
Right.
yourself like, why is it this way? Or why did I do that? Or what, like just being
Yeah.
curious and inquisitive and not afraid. And I feel like that's one of the qualities of just the fire signs in
Yeah.
general. It's just like this courage.
One of the things I always think about, when I was in Ayurveda school, I used to talk to people who were interested in the program and just kind of like talk about what their interests are. And I noticed sometimes people will come forward with like fear of commitment or like fear of if it's going to be the right program. And I was always like, it doesn't have to be your program. You don't have to sign up.
Right.
But I always remember telling people to question everything. And this program is going to teach you so many things. And you might leave with things you still want to learn. And you also might leave with things that you didn't like, but it also might lead you to that pathway. And so I think there's just such a gift to question everything. Like I always feel, even when you're signing up for the thing that you're like, oh my gosh, this is my vibe, 100%. I love it. It still may challenge you. And that is a part of it.
Yes.
That's part of why we choose a direction and then we get into the mess and then we navigate it. I think that's a huge part of what I do in my life is
Yes.
that.
Oh my God, so much wisdom there. I mean, that's so expansive because there's growth and lessons, and there are nuggets of wisdom with every choice, right? With every
Mhm.
path we decide to take, right? There's
Yeah.
no wrong path or wrong choice. There are portals in every choice. So,
Yeah.
so wise, Malia.
And speaking of binary, I always think about this too. So even facilitating spaces and working in DEI or kind of I'll call it like decolonization of the body spaces
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
affinity groups, you always have somebody who comes in that's like, you're not doing it the way that I think should be even more inclusive. And you're
Yeah.
like, yeah, I'm sure we're making mistakes because we all live in this culture.
Right.
You know, we're not better off because we know we're wiser, like we're removed from the thing that we've all learned in systemic culture.
Right.
And so I think there's always something to explore, that no one place can be the perfect place. And the idea that it is the perfect place is actually an illusion of binary.
Yes. Look at you. My goodness. Okay, we could talk forever. I want
I know.
to I mean, I'll just have to have you on again because there's so many things that we could talk about. But I want to find out from you, what are you working on right now that you're excited about that you could share with us?
Well, I think one of the things that I'm just love, one of the projects I'm working on that I feel like is very aligned with this group or this conversation is the Belonging Ambiguity Project. So, this is a part of an organization called Rooted Global Village that I've been working with for the last few years. And Rooted is I'm just going to call it kin building, connection building,
Mhm.
challenging norms, decolonization through the body. And one of the things that we have been doing for a couple cohorts is a where do I belong? Belonging ambiguity for multiracial folks.
Yes.
And so it's a embodied exploration of identity and how that unfolds and how we show up. So we're going to do another cohort in 2026. And I think it's going to be a year-long program this time. Before it was a 4 or 5 month program, but every time we finish, I was like, there's just so much more. And I work with my colleagues, Corinne Bell and Leticia Nieto, who are just incredible people. So there's that going on. I'm also opening up part of Rooted to a money trauma playground that explores our
Nice.
relationship to money through our
Yes.
ancestral stories, through the ways that we relate in our bodies, and how we just find discernment and connection and recognize money as water and collective care systems. So that's this fall. I want to share those two that I think are really aligned. I do a lot of disability inclusion work, but you can find out about that elsewhere. And the other thing that I want to share is with astrology, I'm also just such a huge fan of human design that we were
Yes.
talking about before, too. And I
Huh?
do embodied somatic human design sessions to explore deconditioning through our body through the lens of human design. So that's another thing that I just love doing. And, something you mentioned is like, oh yeah, you're embodying your all of these like parts of your chart. And I'm like, yeah, because it's like consistently the deconditioning process.
Yeah.
And it's the allowing process. And I can't say that's only human design. I think it's a lot of upbringing and who I
Mhm.
am and what I've been following, what I've been drawn to. But so I do human design sessions in that way, and just such a tool. It's a tool for a time of change, which I think you can also relate to in the work that you do.
Yes. Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. You do so many cool things. Malia, this is awesome. I'm so glad that I met you. So, if somebody wants to learn more about you or join one of these programs or these offerings, where should they go to find out more?
Well, you can go to my website, maliawright.com. And also, you can find me on Instagram. I'm also not there often, but I do show up occasionally. I also have a retreat. Now that I'm remembering, this I'm short version of this. You could check it
Mhm.
out. It's called Phenomena. It's an embodied retreat with the whole intention of exploring our body in relationship to land.
Nice.
It's in Hawaii on the Big Island,
Yes. Ooh,
and it's in August. So
all
that's
right.
just that's a playground of body stuff
And that's you can find out more about that at
on my website. Yeah.
maliawright.com. Oh
Yeah.
my god. So
So, and then
cool.
my Instagram is Malia E. My middle name's Elizabeth, Malia E. Wright. So you
Okay.
can find me there on Instagram too.
Perfect. Well, this has been such a pleasure to be in conversation with you about all these different topics. I end each interview with the same question for all of my guests. So, what new cycles are you starting in your lineages?
Actually, on a conceiving journey. So this is very fitting. And one of the things that my husband and I talk a lot about is how we want to raise our kids. And one of the things that we continuously say is we would love to instill confidence in our children to discern and to listen to themselves and to question. So it feels so simple, but that's definitely a part of how we would love to be a part of stewarding these new beings or old beings. Who knows?
I know, right? The young elders that come
The young
through.
elders. There's this book that I love. It's called Spirit Babies. It's about spiritual connection to
Yeah.
souls. You love it. And one of the things it says, oh no, it's in a different book. Anyway, it says children are the elders of the universe timeline.
Yeah.
They are going to be the ones that are going to know more because they're learning in a newer time than
Yeah.
we learned.
Yeah.
And I love this concept of they are the elders of the timeline.
Oh my goodness. This has been amazing. Again, thank you so much. I definitely want to have you on again. We will figure that out. And you guys, thank you for being here. And we will see you next time on the Cycle Starters podcast. Thank you, Malia. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.